Let me start by raising the question of what is the governance gap that we're trying to address in our proposal for a global energy forum. The governance gap is that the institutions we have right now for addressing energy problems are unable to manage those problems for at least three reasons. One is that most of those institutions were set up in an era where governments had direct control over energy supplies and consumption. That's true to a much lesser degree today, much more important role for markets. There are important gaps between issues, energy and water, for example, energy and food issues that are rising in importance. And we have not done a very good job so far in engaging the new champions, India, China, other emerging economies, that for the most part have not been formally engaged in a major way in the existing institutions we have for governing the world's problems related to energy. So what we are proposing is eventually the emergence of what we call a global energy forum. A global forum, legitimate, a place where important energy-related issues can be addressed in a way that engages the major producers and consumers on equal terms. We're proposing to get there in part through some ideas around an energy stability board, or a mechanism by which countries that are relevant for a problem can get together and solve particular problems, and then from that cooperation will emerge more broadly. And I'll talk in a little bit about particular ideas and get your help in the breakout session for particular places where countries might start working on these practical energy problems that today are not being governed very well. So how do we get started? In part, we need to start with a smaller forum, and crucially in this whole process, we need to identify the major consumers and major producers and find ways to get them working on problems together. I think when we do that, there are at least two special sensitivities that any serious effort to manage energy problems must address. One of the special sensitivities clearly is how you're going to engage the new champions. And I would say this issue arises in particular with respect to China. I think existing institutions for the most part have failed to engage China in a way that makes the Chinese comfortable. We saw evidence of that most recently in the Copenhagen conference. But I would say that this story is true not only for China, but also for India and for other important countries. And the other special sensitivity is we have to find a way for consumers and producers to work together. In the industrialized countries, most of our institutions around energy are focused on energy consumption and its side effects. Those institutions, for the most part, have not done a very good job of engaging producers in ways that would give producers confidence, for example, to invest in long-term energy supplies, and that is part of the gridlock that we have right now. Why is the proposal that we're putting forward unique and, we think, viable and important? And it's because there have been many efforts so far to reform existing institutions. Existing institutions do a very good job on the problems they were set up to address. The IEA, the IAEA, and so on. Terrific institutions, they perform important functions. But efforts to reform those institutions and try and take on new problems have met an enormous amount of resistance and difficulty and gridlock. So what our strategy does is it starts by engaging the key countries bottom up, focused on particular problems, and I'm going to talk in a moment about those problems, and I would very much like your help during the breakout session to set up a short list of things that you think will be important for countries to work on. So where do we begin, and how do we begin? We put together a short list of some problems, functions that serious countries could start working on that over time could stitch together into a more effective system for governance on energy and eventually a global energy forum. Here are the three on my list. First, what are you going to do post-Copenhagen? We have a vacuum in governance right now, no clarity on which direction next. The second, innovation. There's a lot of evidence that the world massively underinvests in research and development and testing of technologies, and yet almost all serious energy and environmental problems ultimately get solved with new technologies. How can we, on a global level, invest much greater resources in innovation? And last, our questions around standards. The energy business is very capital intensive, massive resources are needed, and in parallel with that we need standards to make sure that those investments take place in ways that respect other priorities, governance, human rights, and so on. Thank you.
Good.